All right. I told you that the only real math you were going to have to do this semester is a little bit of work with percentages. So I wanted to remind you of the basics of converting between fractions, decimals, and percentages. And I hope this chart is helpful to you. I use it in all my classes where we're going over fractions, decimals, and percents. And I label the chart in this order because it helps you remember which way to move the decimal. To change a fraction to a decimal, you just divide the numerator by the denominator. So to change 3/4 to a decimal, you divide the 3 by the 4. You punch that on the calculator. 3 divided by 4 is 0.75. And then to change a decimal to a percent, you move the decimal 2 places to the right. 0.75 is 75%. So 75% of something and 3/4 of something represent the same amount. If I give you a decimal and ask you to change it to a fraction, you have to look at the place value of the last digit. Remember, the place values to the right of the decimal start with your tenths. So the zero's in the tenths place, the seven's in the hundredths place, the 5 is in the thousandths place. The place value of that last digit gives you your denominator. I could write 0.075 as a fraction by putting 0.75 over 1,000, but at that point the leading zero becomes unnecessary. That's just 75 over 1,000. And of course, if the directions on this problem said write it as a reduced fraction, then I could reduce that by dividing both numerator and denominator by 25. To change a decimal to a percent again, move the decimal 2 places to the right. If I move that decimal 2 places to the right, I get 7.5%. 0.075 or 75 1,000ths is equal to 7.5%. If you give me a percent and ask me to change it to a decimal, I'm going to the left on the chart, so I move my decimal to the left 2 places. The decimal started after the 12 in the 12%, so when I move it 2 places to the left, it's 0.12. 12% is equal to 0.12 as a decimal, or as a fraction, that 2 is in the hundredths place. So I'd write 12 over 100. And again, almost all the problems in the homework are going to say write that fraction in lowest terms, so I wouldn't enter it as 12 over 100. I could divide numerator and denominator by 4 and get 3 over 25. 3 over 25 is 12%. Here's an improper fraction because the numerator is bigger than the denominator, but to change it to a decimal, I still divide the numerator by the denominator. 5 divided by 2 is 2.5, and that's what 5/2 equals as a decimal. To change that to a percent, move the decimal 2 places to the right. That's 250%. 5/2 is more than 1, 2.5 is more than 1, 250% is more than 100%. And then last example on this page, 0.3%. I'm changing a percent to a decimal, so I need to move the decimal 2 places to the left. If I move that decimal 2 places to the left, I'd have to add 2 zeros. 0.3% equals 0.003 as a decimal, and then as a fraction, that 3 is in the thousandths place, so 3 out of 1,000 would be the fractional equivalent. All right. Couple of quick applications of percents. In statistics, you're going to have to answer questions like, what is 5% of 400? Or 5 is what percent of 400? Or 5 is 25% of what? All of this type problem involves percents, totals, and parts. And it's always true that some percent of the total will give you the part. You may remember from algebra, of usually tells you to multiply, and in a word problem, the equals goes where the is. So I've used the variable t for total and p for percent. Percent times total is part. For each of these problems, I need to figure out which two pieces of that puzzle I'm given and which I'm looking for. And number one, 5% is obviously the percent. If I'm given a percent, I have to put it into the equation as a decimal. So 5% as a decimal is 0.05. What is 5% of 400? That 400 is the total, and I'm looking for the part. So 0.05 times 400 will give me the part. 5% of 400 is 20. So 20 is 5% of 400. Makes sense because 10% of 400 would be 40. 5% is half of that. Second example, 5 is what percent of 500? Excuse me, 400. Well, here I'm looking for the percent. If I don't want to let it if I don't want to keep that percent sign in there, I'm just going to say, oh, I don't know. Let's use, don't know why I'm having trouble picking a variable. Just let A stand for percent. No reason. Percent times total. The total here is the 400. And 5 is just part of the 400. If we're solving that equation for A, solve for A, this is held together by multiplication. So if I wanted the A by itself, I'd have to divide. And you always divide by what's with the variable. So A would be 5 over 400, or that's 1 over 80. And I actually do not have a calculator handy. You would want to write that as a percent by dividing the 1 by 80. It's going to be close to 1%, but I don't have the exact decimal equivalent of 1 over 80 right now. Number 3, 5 is 25% of what? Obviously, the 25% is the percent, which I'm going to write as a decimal. 5 is a part of the total that I'm looking for. So I'm going to be careful to put 5 under part, and I can leave T for total. 0.25 times T is 5. I'm solving for T, the total. I just need to divide both sides by 0.25. And 5 divided by 0.25 is 20. Makes sense. 25% is a fourth. 5 is a fourth of what? 5 is a fourth of 20. So I'm sure that's the right answer. All right, 2 last problems. Number 4, of 3,200 football fans polled, 80% supported a college football championship playoff system. And if you watch any football at all, you know we have that championship playoff system in place now. But we want to know how many fans would be represented by 80% of 3,200. Write the 80% as a decimal, 0.8. The 3,200, is that the total fans or the part that were surveyed? That is the total surveyed. We're looking for the part who said that they wanted a championship playoff. So 80% times 3,200 would give us the number that we're looking for. And 80% of 3,200 is 2,560. It's not 100%, but it's a large majority of fans said they wanted the playoff system, and now we have it. And the last one, of 1,500 movie theater patrons polled, 300 preferred action films over any other genre. What percent is that? We're looking for percent. Here again, I'm in a dilemma about what to use for percent. I can't use P because P stands for part. I'll just use A again. A times the total. What was the total number of people surveyed? That's the 1,500 equals the part who loved action films. That's the 300. And so to solve for A, divide both sides by 1,500. 300 divided by 1,500 is 1/5, or as a decimal, it's 20%. So 20% of those surveyed said that they liked action films better than any other genre. All right, just to recap what we've talked about in these two sections, we've talked about key elements of a statistical study. The study has to be set up correctly or all bets are off and your data is worthless and your conclusions are invalid. We've talked about common pitfalls in analyzing data, such as just because there is a relationship between two variables, we can't assume that one is causing the other. We've talked about loaded questions and other very common mistakes made when analyzing data. And then we've had a brief review of fractions, decimals, and percents. I hope that was helpful to you, and I will see you again in section 1.3.